Welcome back everyone. For today's video we are going to be taking a look at some of the bots that are featured on the chess.com site. Now the two bots in question are the bots Magnus Bot, of course named after the 5-time Norwegian world champion Magnus Carlsen, and the month of June bot Sensei. Now I recently played against the Sensei Bot in one of my previous videos. The match was very up and down. I lost the first game before rebounding to win the match. However, for today's video we're taking a look at the games played between these two bots, both of which you have access to on the site chess.com. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action. Now in the first game we have Sensei Bot playing with the white pieces and Magnus with the black pieces. So the game starts out with the move d4. Magnus plays knight f6, we get c4, and now we have the move e6, and here we get the move knight f3. Now all this of course is very standard, but I do want to point out a couple of things here. In this position, white normally has a choice between knight to c3, which leads usually to the Nimzo Indian defense after this move bishop to b4, or white can play the move knight to f3, which usually leads to either the Catalan or a queen's gambit decline. So Magnus Bot plays d5. We get knight c3, and now we have the move bishop e7, and this is the classic queen's gambit decline. Now, there are many different orders you can reach this variation through, but it is generally the same setup where black plays e6, d5, knight f6, and bishop to e7. Now another way you can reach a queen's gambit decline is also after d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, same setup, knight f3, and bishop e7. Usually it's simply a matter of which way white brings out the knights, or the order I should say. So we get bishop e7. Sensei Bot plays bishop g5. We get the move h6, bishop to h4, and now the move castles. Here Sensei Bot plays e3, and we get this move b6. Now this is a system that Magnus Carlsen has played very frequently. This is what is known as the Tartakower variation of the queen's gambit decline, where black plays b6. There's another variation with the move knight to e4, which was named after another world champion, Emanuel Lasker. This line is a little bit drier as the bishops come off the board right away. Usually white plays something like rook c1, and with the knights and bishops coming off the board, it's much more stable. Now b6 is the Tartakower. As I said, Magnus has played it. Of course, another very famous goat of all time, Garry Kasparov himself, also was playing the system in the 1980s. Now yes, you did hear that correctly, the 1980s. I did just say that. Now again, that is one of the things with chess. A lot of these opening lines develop over time, but some of these opening systems like the queen's gambit decline are so fundamentally sound that they've been very solid for over 100 years. Now the only reason I mention that is because one of the things that I realized when I was starting to break into the elite level of chess is that some of the openings that I played a lot as a kid and even up until grandmaster, like the king's Indian defense, they are playable if you know all the little nuances, but because you're giving your opponent so much space in the center, generally it's very tough to play. Whereas an opening like the queen's gambit decline, which by the way I did start playing around 2009, is so fundamentally sound that you can play it and nothing is going to dramatically change over time. That's another reason I do advocate for people who are beginners to play such systems as well. All right, so back to the game. We get the Tartakower system with b6, Magnus Bot trying to go for the classic fianchetto with bishop to b7. We get bishop to e2, Magnus Bot takes, we got castles, and now we have the move bishop b7. We get bishop takes c4, and now we get this move a6 being played. Now in this position, you'll notice that black has a really nice bishop on this long diagonal, which is unopposed. Generally, a lot of the play here is going to revolve around the central pawns. If white could get a move like e4 with the big white center here where black cannot capture, say black has knight h7, bishop g3 as an example, white is doing very, very well with the big white center. Meanwhile, if black can get something like knight b to d7, rook f1, c5, and force a trade, generally the two bishops on the diagonals and the great nice knight placement, I should say, black is doing well. So we get the move a4 here. Sensei Bot tries to stop Magnus Bot from playing b5 to attack the bishop, and now we get the move knight c6. Here we have the move bishop g3, and now Magnus Bot plays knight a5. Now this really shows the uniqueness of the game of chess, because without this a4 move, say white were to go bishop b3, almost certainly you would put the knight on d7 to prepare this move pawn to c5. But chess, of course, is a game of 1,000 rules, all the little nuances, where do pieces belong. And once we get a4, the reason that Magnus Bot goes knight c6 is that now there is a weakness on b4. So say white goes bishop b3, you can go knight to b4 here, and suddenly with this pawn on a4, white cannot tickle the knight. If we go back to this previous position that I just showed here, we'll say knight c6. Here, if you ever go knight b4, white simply attacks the horse and kicks it back out of town. So that's why this move at knight c6 is so strong here versus putting the knight on d7, because since white has played a4 and created this weakness on b4, now the knight has a better home on b4 versus being on d7 supporting the pawn thrust. So you get knight to a5. Now you're probably saying, well, you just said knight b4, why knight a5? Now, of course, bots are, of course, very strong here, and I believe my understanding of this is that if white were to go queen e2 here, you would not go knight a5 simply because with the bishop on h4 there's some specific reason. I'm not sure what that reason is. Let me actually try to figure this out. If you were to go knight a5, bishop, not knight a5, sorry, knight b4 here, and white goes queen e2, c5. I think the main difference is that for whatever reason, with this bishop on g3 spying the diagonal, maybe your queen will be a little bit uncomfortable, for example, with these rooks on the two open files. Honestly, I'm not sure. It doesn't look that bad to me, even from the valuation, but we get to move knight a5 instead. So we have the move bishop to e2. Magnus Bot plays rook c8, preparing for c5, and now we get to move rook c1. Here we get c5, Sensei Bot trades, and now we get to move queen c2, and Magnus Bot goes knight c6. Now at this point, black is doing very well here. You have the bishops on the great diagonals, you have this knight on c6 that can jump to b4, and of course you also have the rook on the open file. So both sides have pretty much achieved perfect harmony in the position, but I still would say that I very slightly prefer black. So you get rook d1, queen to e7, h3, and now we get to move rook f d8. Here, Sensei Bot trades the rooks and goes knight to e5. Magnus Bot trades and plays move knight to e8. Now, these bots are not absolutely perfect. I will point out that with the bots, if they are not purely a stockfish or like a Komodo type variant, or it's directly the bot with all the regular programming, one thing I've noticed over time from having played against these bots is usually for one or two moves, there's a slight period in the game where the bots do make some mistakes. Otherwise, of course, they're complete machines and they play nearly perfectly. But there are these moments in the game. Now, the reason I mention that is, as you can see here, if Magnus Bot were to play the move bishop d6, takes, and rook d6, with a better bishop on b7 here, even though white should be able to save after rook d1, black's position is very slightly preferable, as you can see from the evaluation bar. But we get knight to e8. Sensei Bot goes knight e4, Magnus Bot plays bishop b4, and now we get the move bishop d4. Magnus Bot plays rook c8, we get knight to c3, and now we have the move knight to d6. Now, a lot of these moves are interesting because the computer does not say they're the top moves, but nonetheless, black and white both have pretty stable positions here. It's not clear who's much better, but the show goes on. So we get takes on b6, we get bishop takes g2, and now we have the move king takes bishop. Now, this is, of course, very flashy here. You probably are about to ask yourselves, why hasn't Hikaru mentioned that knight d6 hangs the pawn on b6? And the reason is because this occurs in the game, and in fact, it is not a blunder, because after bishop takes g2, we get takes, queen to b7, and now the queen checks the king, and after white plays king g1, queen takes b6, material is balanced. Now, position here probably still should be close to a draw, but black is definitely for preference due to this weak white king on g1, which is a little bit open without the protection of the g2 pawn, but also because even though white has a 2-on-1 majority here, say black gets a5 here just to set it up, white can never attack this pawn or bishop. They're anchored on these two squares, and now black will try to attack near the white king. So it's slightly preferable for Magnus Bot, but it's still not over just yet. So you got the move queen d3. Magnus Bot plays a5. You don't want to hang the pawn, and now you anchor the bishop on b4. We have bishop f3, queen d8, and now we have the move rook c2. And Magnus Bot correctly plays queen h4, going after the pawn on h3. There's some rook lifts now as well. The knight is very close to the white king, and white has some issues to deal with. So we get the move bishop g2. Magnus Bot plays knight f5. We get knight to d5, takes, and now we get to move bishop d6. Now, I think I saw a slight red pop up here where knight f5 is inaccurate. The computer, or the strong bot I should say, prefers move rook to d8, trying to claim this lane with all kinds of fossils by moving the knight here potentially, but we get knight f5 instead. We get knight d5, takes. Now if Magnus Bot captures the horse, you would lose the horse on f5. We get bishop d6, knight c3, queen d8, and now we get to move bishop e4. Magnus Bot plays knight to h4 here, getting the knight on a very nice square here, potentially attacking the white king as well. We get king f1, bishop e5, queen d3, and now we get the trade and king to f8. Now, one of the funny things about this game, as you're looking at it, is that this is actually very reminiscent of a game that Magnus Carlsen, the real human, not the bot, would probably play here, because it's headed towards an end game where material is even, but due to the opposite color bishops and the fact that white cannot make use of these two pawns on the queen side, the pawns are stuck forever. This is a position where you try to squeeze and win the game. So you get f4. Magnus Bot trades and now plays move king e7. We get king f2, f5, king g3, and now we have the move g5. Now, in this position, the big problem for white here, or for the Sensei Bot, I should say, is that when you look at black's pawns, a lot of these black pieces are on the opposite color of the bishop, with the exception of these 2 pawns, and white doesn't really have any passed pawns. Now white can try to push the C pawn up the board, for example, but the king will always stop this pawn from getting through. So when you look at the combination of the pieces on the dark squares versus light square bishop, and the fact that at some point black probably is going to go e5 and only have 1 pawn on the light square, everything else being on the opposite color of this light square B, black has great chances to win. So we get bishop b1. Magnus Bot plays knight g6. We get takes, and now we get to move bishop c2, king d6, king f2, knight to e5, and now we get to move pawn to e4. Now at this point the game is actually close to loss for the Sensei Bot here. I think taking on g5 might have been a mistake here. I'm curious what the actual strong computer says if you keep waiting. Apparently here it's bad, but maybe you're still surviving. And I think the main reason for that is that if you keep the pawn on f4 versus g5, at some point here you can trade and play e4, and now if f4 you have something like, I think, king g4 going after the 2 pawns. Additionally here, black will be stuck with the knight on the square because of this trade and pushing the p. So this is a big mistake from the bot here, and I'll show why. The reason here is that now with this knight being super active, jumping every which way, if white plays the e4 like in the game, black goes f4 here, and now the king has no entry to get forward. This knight cuts off all the critical squares, and now the game is simply lost. So we get king e2, knight c4, bishop d3, knight e3. Interestingly enough, as you see, the evaluation bar is starting to fluctuate. So I don't know if the Magnus Bot was getting tired or the programming leads to some mistakes here. But in this position, after king to e2, I believe that king to e7, bringing the king around, is supposed to be winning here. Actually, yeah, computer does say it's cleanly winning. At the right moment, you go knight d7 to bring the knight to c5. And after king f3, king g6, let's just say white goes bishop c2, king to h5, king g2, and now king to h4, bishop d1 and e5 here. You'll notice that all of black's pawns and king are on the opposite color, and actually in a position like this you'll notice that every single piece here is on the opposite color of this light square bishop, so this is simply dead lost. So we get knight c4, bishop d3, knight e3, bishop b1, knight c4, bishop a2, and now we have to move knight b2. We got bishop b3, Magnus Bot plays king e5, and now we get to move bishop c2, trying to guard all the pawns. Magnus Bot plays knight c4, we get bishop d3, and here we have the move knight b6, bishop c2, white desperately trying to hang on, guarding all the pawns with a bishop, and now Magnus plays knight d7. We get king f2, king f6, bishop b3, and now we get to move king to g6. Now this move is a bit fancy. It's not the move that I would play in a game. Probably here I would simply play knight c5 first, but after king g6 you're not actually afraid of this pawn on e6 being captured, because if white were to capture here, now you have knight c5 attacking the pawns and the bishop. Everything's getting forked here. Most importantly, the d7 square to guard and the b3 square to guard the pawn both are not available, as the knight would capture the bishop, and if you get this a pawn you will start pushing your p up the queen side and win the game. Sample line is something like bishop c4 takes, king f3, knight c5. Let's just say bishop d5 here, black goes a4, I don't know, bishop c4, a3, bishop d5, and now you go knight to a4, bringing the knight forward and supporting the pawn thrust forward. So we get to move king to f3 here, and now Magnus Bot plays knight c5, bishop c2, and lo and behold, we get to move king to h5, and once again we reach the position very similar to the line that I mentioned earlier. We get e5 here being played by Sensei Bot. This is a logical move here because white needs to have some targets. You're trying to fix this pawn on the same color as the bishop so you can attack it. Also, by pushing the pawn forward, you open up the diagonal. Alas, it is not enough, as we get king h4, king g2, Magnus Bot plays knight d7, we get bishop b3, knight c5, bishop d1, and now we get to move f3. Now it's not the only way to win, but again it's very flashy here, because if white takes, you take, and you have the p running up the a file. If white takes with the king here, you can simply take, and now after king f2 we get g4, c4, knight d3, king g1, Magnus Bot plays king g3, we get bishop e2, and now we get to move knight b2. Now there are many different ways to win here. Knight c5 would also be good enough, but what Magnus Bot understands is that the knight is going to be able to capture this pawn and simply stop the c pawn from queening. We got c5 takes, c6, knight b6, c7, and now we get to move king to f4. Sensei Bot plays bishop a6, Magnus Bot plays a4, we get king g2, a3 here. If white were to queen, just to illustrate, after takes, you do not push the p with a3, because after takes, it's spaghetti-o time. After king e5, bishop a2, the game will simply end in a draw, as the bishop will stop the p here, and the king will stop the g pawn, and the wide p-pos aren't enough to win. But what would happen here after bishop c8 is you take, And after bishop to a6, you can simply go, I think king f4 is cleanest. You got bishop c4, e5, let's say bishop e6, a3, bishop a2. And now after e4, you have 3 wide peepos here. The bishop and the king cannot stop all 3. Sample line, king g2, you go g3. Let's just say white plays bishop d5, for example. Now you play e3. If white goes back, you get e2, and the pawn pushes through here as the king can't get over. And after bishop c4, you play a2, sacking the pawn. e2, you win the game. If white doesn't take, you get a queen. And if white goes king f1 the last try, you go king e5, bishop a2, and now you can simply bring the king over to the queen side here, because if white ever moves the king here, you go e2, white goes this way, you have g2. The 2 pawns are split by 1 file, all the squares are covered here, so the king can't move. After bishop f7, you go king c3, and after bishop e6, you can go king b2 followed by a2. This is one way to win, or you can go king d2, and now white cannot stop all 3 of the pawns, and black wins the game. So back to this line, where were we? We get to move king g2, a3, bishop c4, takes, king g3, Magnus Bot plays king d6, we get king g4, takes, king d6, bishop b3, and now we get to move king e5. Now this, of course, is winning. I would honestly say there are many easier ways to win this from the black side than what the Magnus Bot has done, but at this point, it's all very formulaic, and it's a straightforward path to victory. We got bishop a2, knight d5, bishop b3, king e4, king g5, knight b4, king g4, and now we get to move king d3. Sensei Bot goes king f3, we get king c3, bishop e6, king b2, we get to move king to e4, and now we get to move knight c6. Now the main issue for black here is that you cannot ever push this pawn forward because white will sacrifice and the game ends in a draw. But when you go knight c6, and actually many other knight squares are available, the key square in this position is to get the knight to b3 to shield this knight from the pawn, and then once you push the pawn forward, it's all over. So we get king d5, a2 is played. Of course, again, if king e3 or king e3, you go knight a5, and after king d2, you play knight b3, checking the king. And if white moves the king, you push the pawn through. And if white takes knight, after takes, king c1 is the rare exception where with the edge pawn, after a2, the king is 1 square too far away. King can't get over, you promote, and you win the game. So we get this move, we get this move king d5. In this position, Magnus Bot pushes, and now it's queen versus king, and the rest is very basic here. Eventually, you just checkmate on the dark squares. Of course, the bot could bring the king forward, and just to illustrate why this is so easy to win, what happens is you play check, king d6, king a8, and after king c7, the bishop has to move, and you simply checkmate on the a5 square. So we get king d5, queen to d8 is played. Of course, being as they're bots, they played a checkmate, so it's queen versus king. You use the queen, bring everything close, and then eventually the game ends after queen h6 checkmate. So Magnus Bot beats Sensei in the first game, a very back and forth affair. But what I really like about this game is that maybe it's the programming or maybe it's just by coincidence, the way the Magnus Bot won this game is definitely the way that Magnus Carlsen himself would play chess. So if we assume that it's based on the coding or the programming, then it's really nice to see this bot plays in the style of the true 5-time world champion himself. All right, so that's the first game between the two bots. Now they played a rematch with Magnus Bot having the white pieces, and the game starts with the move e4. We get c6. This, of course, is a classic Caro Kann defense. We get d4, d5, and now Magnus Bot plays knight d2. We get takes, knight d7, and here we get to move knight g5. We get knight gf6, bishop d3, e6, knight f3, and now we get to move bishop d6. Now, for those of you guys who watch my videos, or if you are a long-time fan of chess, ironically, you probably remember this game, which I was at, by the way. I was at the live game for this in the 6th and fateful game of the match between Garry Kasparov and Deep Blue, the rematch, I believe in 1998, although I could have it wrong, the second match at any rate. In that game, Garry Kimovich Kasparov played the move h6, and Deep Blue sacked the knight with knight takes pawn. Garry would go on to lose the game, I believe, in a mere 19 moves. And with that, we would start to realize our inevitability and I guess sad truth that the computers were about to surpass us in the game of chess. Now, luckily, despite that historic moment, chess still continues to thrive, as we know, despite the strength of the machines. Now, the Sensei Bot, of course, unlike Garry, does not have the psychological component. When Garry played that move h6, I remember this very clearly as I was at the match. He thought that if the computer was not programmed with the correct move, knight takes pawn, it would simply not want to sacrifice material. It would play the move knight to e4 instead, and Garry would get a very playable position. But the computer did sack on e6. It would crush Garry, and the rest is history. So we get bishop d6 here. Sensei Bot obviously not going to fall for the trap. We have queen to e2 played by Magnus Bot. We get h6, knight e4, knight takes knight, and now we get to move queen takes knight on e4. Sensei Bot plays queen c7, Magnus Bot castles, we get b6, rook e1, knight f6, queen h4, and now we get to move bishop b7. Now this is actually quite similar to the first game of the match as well. If black is ever able to get c5 and have these two b's on these nice long diagonals, black will be doing very well in this position. So it really hinges on whether you can activate these two bishops on these diagonals. All right, highlighted the wrong diagonal, I guess, but from c5 to g1. So here we get the move bishop g5 from Magnus Bot, trying to pressure this knight on f6. Of course, you don't take the bishop because then you would lose the rook on h8, or sack the rook as we like to say, and you would lose the game very quickly. So we get bishop g5. Sensei Bot plays queen to e7, guarding the knight, and now Magnus Bot plays knight to e5. Here we get castles from Sensei Bot. Now we get to move bishop d2. White, of course, cannot leave the bishop because the rook on d8 would guard this rook on h8. So we get bishop d2, g5, queen g3, and now we get to move bishop c7. Magnus Bot plays queen to e3, and here we get to move knight d7. Now it's interesting to note that the really strong engine, as you can probably tell, the bar is slightly favoring black around this point, and the reason is because of this move c5 once again, because after takes, you get these two bishops on these great diagonals here. The knight can jump to the center, and honestly, when I look at this, I would prefer to play from the black side. Instead, we get knight d7. Magnus Bot goes bishop c3, we get takes, and now we get to move h5. Now, this position is completely fine for black, but all the zing in this position, or the counterplay, is kind of gone, because after c5 and bishop e4, this bishop on the diagonal towards the white bishop and the pawn, this bishop is blunted by this bishop, but the bishop on c7 is also completely blunted by this pawn on e5, so neither of these two bishops actually have much activity. So that's why we get h5. Magnus Bot plays a4, we get a5, and now we get to move rook a d1, king b8, bishop to e2, and h4 is played by Sensei Bot, trying to expand further on the king side. Magnus Bot plays b3, simply guarding the pawn on a4. We get c5, and now we have the move h3. Now at this point, white has a tiny advantage here, primarily because there is no king side attack. This pawn can't go forward, this one can't go forward anymore. So because the king side is clogged and white has a little bit more space with the open file and potentially pressure towards the pawn on g5, it is not looking good for the Sensei Bot to equalize the score. So we get rook takes rook. Magnus takes, we get rook to d8, and here we get the move rook to d3. Sensei Bot plays rook d5, we get bishop f3, takes, and now we get the move bishop takes and the move queen d7. Now in this position, it's objectively equal here. You could maybe argue white has a very tiny advantage due to all these pawns being on the same color as the bishop, but with this bishop on this technically closed diagonal with potential down the road, say you go, let's just say a random move like queen g4 and f5. I know some, actually queen g4 would be on the same diagonal. I should say after say queen e3 and f5, if white is not careful, you could run into some queen d1 idea trying to checkmate the white king. Here, of course, it doesn't work as white can block, but the idea of opening up this diagonal does exist. So that gives black some counterplay here. And then when you consider the fact that black also controls the open file, the bishop is glued to the square, the queen is guarded this square, as the black queen will infiltrate otherwise. So you get king f1. Queen d8, king e2, not queen takes pawn, because here after queen d1, bishop to e1, queen takes c2, queen takes pawn. Black will probably only be able to force a draw, but after check and queen d1, the bishop is on pre. After check, king a7, you have to go king to f1. If you don't do king f1, you'll lose the bishop, and after check, queen d1, it's the exact same situation. So we get king to e2, white does not take the pawn. Now Sensei Bot goes queen g8, king d2, queen d8, king e2, queen g8, king d1, queen d8, king e1, queen g8. We got queen to e4 here. Magnus Bot deciding to not take the draw with this move queen to e4, and now we get queen g7. Here we get king to d2. We have the move king a7, king c1, queen h8, king b1, and now the Magnus Bot has gone for a king walk where the king is on the queen side. You have a whole chain of pawns here and the bishop to support this king. So with the pawns and the bishop, this king should be very safe. We get king b8, bishop d2, queen g7, bishop c3, queen h8, bishop b2, king a7. A lot of dilly-dallying here before the Magnus Bot plays g3. Now, the Magnus Bot here is trying to create what we know as the outside pawn. White's trying to get a pawn far away on the very edge of the board to push the p up. Computer doesn't think this is anything special, but it does make a lot of sense. So after h takes g3, we get queen to h8, queen to f3, and now we have the move bishop takes e5. Now here, you could try to play h4, but after takes, and queen h5, this black queen is very well anchored. It targets both the pawns on e5 and h4 at the same time. And if white tries to go queen f4 here, black can go bishop d8, queen guards the pawn at f7, and all of a sudden you're going to lose the pawn on h4, and if you lose this one, you might even lose the game. So get queen f3. You get takes, queen takes f7, king b8 played by the Sensei Bot, and now we get the trade and h4. Now what the Magnus Bot is doing here is it's trying to create the outside pawn here in a queen and pawn endgame, but generally speaking in queen and pawn endgames, unless you have a pass pawn very far up the board here, I should say you could get something like this, for example. This might be winning at this point because you could check, and then play h6 here where the queen guards both the pawns, unless you get a pawn really far up the board like 5th rank or 5th. This is the 5th rank, 6th, 7th rank. If you don't get a pass pawn really far up the board, generally there are always going to be resources to save the game for the side, which is a little bit worse. So we get h4. Sensei Bot correctly plays queen to e4 here, attacking the pawn on c2. Now white could play something like h5, but after takes, king a1. For example, say black were to take here, even though black is up a lot of pawns, this endgame is simply going to be a draw here, because after this move h6 takes and king b1, the white pawn is so far up, or actually king b2 I should say, the white pawn is so far up the board here that black will have no choice but to simply make a draw by repetition. So this is also an important theme in endgames, that material doesn't always matter in these queen and pawn endgames. If you can get a pawn really far up the board like this, even though you're losing all your queenside pawns and black has 3 extra juicers here, it doesn't matter because this pawn is too far and black will have to make a draw. So it's an important thing to counterplay in queen and pawn endgames. If you have a very far advanced pass pawn, it doesn't matter if you sacrifice all the pawns, because the queen and the one pawn usually will be enough. So instead we get queen to f2 here from Magnus Bot, trying to guard both the pawns. Get takes, queen guards c2 and h4, and now we get to move e5. Magnus Bot plays h5, and here we get to move queen h7, queen h2, and the move king to a7. Here we get h6, and now Sensei Bot plays e4. Both sides do have pass pawns here going up the board, and this comes back to the theme of what I was saying, where if you have pass pawns and queen and pawn endgames, you are always looking to push your p, always without exception. We get to move queen to f4, and now we get e3 here, and Magnus Bot takes the pawn. We get takes, king to a3, and even though it looks like there should be an easy way to force a repetition, shockingly the king is safe here. After black goes queen b1, for example, white can play queen c3, and suddenly with no checks on a1 or c1 here, white is actually doing completely fine. It's still a draw with perfect play, but there's no instant draw. We get c4 instead. Magnus Bot takes, we get takes, h7 played, and now we get the move queen b4. We get king a2, takes, king b2, queen b5, king c2, queen c6, queen c3, and now we get to move queen g6. Magnus Bot obviously plays queen d3. We get queen g2, king b1, and even though black has 1 extra pawn here, because of how far advanced this h pawn is 1 square from queening, the bot basically has to force a draw. We get a bunch of checks here. We get check, king b3, a4, king c4, queen g7, check, king a4, queen c8. I will point out here that the way this endgame has transpired the last few moves would never happen between humans. A human here would never go a4 in this position, would play something like queen to e5 and keep the pawns in play. But the bots, of course, they have the table-based endgames. They know it's a forced draw, so almost anything they do here will force the game into that situation. So we get queen c8, king b3, check, king b2, queen to e5. We get king c2, bunch of checks here. We got queen a4, queen h4, check, king b2, check, king c3, check, queen c4, check, queen d3, check, king c4, and eventually this game is going to end in a draw. There isn't much commentary I can add about these checks because it's basically just back and forth here. Check, king e3, check, king f2, check, king f3, check. And now we get queen c2, queen e5, king b3, and after queen to b5, this game ends in a draw, I believe by repetition for a 3rd time. Of course, those last 20 moves that I just blitzed out were the top computer moves, just simply forcing a draw. In these sorts of endgames, the computers will basically find the way to draw that drags the game out the longest, because it knows that it's a forced draw. For those of you guys who are wondering why the moves were the way they were, it will basically play the odds where it knows it's a forced draw, it's perfect information, but it will keep the game going as long as possible, because if the bot were playing a human probably would actually make a blunder, unlike one of these bots. So second game between the Magnus Bot and Sensei Bot ends in a draw. This means that the Magnus Bot wins the match by a score of 1.5 to half. This was a lot of fun covering these games. Reminder, these bots are available on chess.com. You can play against them. I can play against them. So as long as you have a registered account, you have that option. So just wanted to highlight a couple of these bots. Thought it'd be interesting to see the Sensei Bot, which is very strong, play against the Magnus Bot, which is also strong. And I do hope, of course, to do more of these videos in the future. So On that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap of the matchup between two of the great bots on the site chess.com, the Magnus Bot and the Sensei Bot. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great content in the coming days. Hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.